Hey, well, welcome back to another episode of Exploring Israel for Bible Study. I'm Jeff Baxter. I'm the next-gen pastor at Mission Hills Church in Littleton, Colorado. And I love going to Israel. I love taking pilgrims to Israel to be able to explore these places. And sometimes people can't get over to Israel, so I want to bring Israel to you to help you see the Bible go from black and white to color, to see the places and the people of the New Testament and the Old Testament come to life. So today, let's talk about the Praetorium, or the Judgment Hall of Pilate. Do you know what the Praetorium is? Well, come find out with me. Okay, let's go to the Praetorium, or the Judgment Hall of Pilate, where you're going to see some significant things take place here. Today we're going to venture down below the old city of Jerusalem to see where Jesus would have spent his last hours before he left with his cross to head towards Golgotha to be crucified for the forgiveness of sins. It's called the Judgment Hall of Pilate, or the Praetorium. Today it's a Catholic church is over the top of it, and you head into the church and then down below the street to see where the level would have been back when Jesus was in Jerusalem. Because remember, everything in Jerusalem today that you see is above what actually would have been the streets and the places where Jesus would have been during that day. Because over time, different civilizations have built up Jerusalem. So we head on down, and Matthew gives us the account of what took place in Matthew chapter 27. Here's what it says. Then he released Barabbas, that is Pilate did, to them, that is the crowd, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the Praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put on a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. And they put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. And they spit on him, and they took a staff and they struck him on the head again and again. And after they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. Matthew chapter 27, verses 26 through 31. This is the place where Jesus, after Barabbas was handed over to the crowd on that traditional deal that happened at Passover where a criminal was set free, Pilate gave him the choice, Jesus or Barabbas, and the crowd chose Barabbas. A terrorist was handed over to the crowd. Jesus, an innocent one, would be set to be crucified by the Romans. He was sentenced there to be crucified, and he would be flogged. That is 40 lashes on his back, minus one, because they didn't want him to die. They wanted him to suffer. That's what they did with prisoners. So they took a cat of nine tails of several whip strands with bones and rock in them, and hit his back and began to rip open his back to the edge of death. Jesus had a crown of thorns jammed on his head, probably taken from the Kindred Valley. The soldiers mocked him. They gambled over his clothing in that space, because on the floor in this space is what's called the game of the Kings, or the game of the King. And you can see it etched in the floor that would have been there when Jesus was there, and they would have thrown out dice, probably made from bones, to gamble over who would have gotten Jesus' clothes. The soldiers gambled over those clothes, and then they would finally probably take his crossbeam of his cross, stand him up, put it on his shoulders, the same back that would have been flogged, and he would have walked out the door heading towards Golgotha. This is such a sobering place, and when you're there, it's like the weight of the world. It feels like right there where Jesus had all this suffering take place for you and for me before he would walk out to Golgotha to be crucified with the worst capital punishment of all time on a Roman cross, dying for the forgiveness of sins. It's an amazing place to visit. It's a sobering place to visit, and I hope it's been helpful for you to see these pictures make it come to life where Jesus would have been before he was led down the road out to Golgotha to be crucified. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.